All right. Awesome. Welcome, everyone. Nice to have you all here. I hope you enjoyed the keynotes earlier today. A bunch of exciting news from Mate on the UC side and around DBSequel. So very exciting stuff to see. And he gave you a quick preview of like some of the stuff you're thinking about metrics, but we have a lot more content to cover. So I hope you all enjoy the rest of the session here. So let's get started. So I'm John, spelled C-A-N, pronounced John. We actually have another John in the house that's also helping us this session. I'm on the product management side at Databricks, working on a few different efforts, including Unity Catalog metrics. And giving and adding more business context, making that available within Unity Catalog, centralizing that information, and then making that useful across all the tools that you use and love is something of a core mission for this team, right? And when we kind of think about it, right, everyone's goal is, hey, how do I get from left to right? Right. So I have all of this different types of data, and I want to serve it and make use of it across different surfaces. How do I solve this, right? How do I have reliable, consistent, repeatable semantics, business metrics that I can share across my enterprise? And when you kind of think about the reality, getting there is hard, right? Because what you end up is you have many different tables, many different qualities of data, many different types of data. And then as you kind of have different users, different tools, different kind of clients, try to query that data. They come up with their own queries. They come up with kind of slightly different versions of the same kind of metric. So you end up in a situation where you're almost correct, but you're never the same across different tools, or you end up repeating the same logic across many different tools. And just to kind of zoom in one more level, right? It all starts with a business question, right? For example, let's say you're trying to get like, hey, what did I have here? What is the revenue per active customer, right? And then from there, you kind of need to first agree on the definition, right? So what is revenue? What is active customers? What do I need my business to be able to analyze these things by? Like, do I need them to be able to be analyzed by region, business unit, quarter, probably 50 other things, right? 50 other dimensions, right? And then once you figure out the definition problem, then you need to figure out, okay, so what does this map to in my data lake, database, data warehouse, right? So there's that whole like a logical to physical mapping that you have to go through. And then when you decide to implement this stuff, right? So let's say you want to serve revenue per active customer as a data set that you can kind of make available, right? You have a few options. One option is you could create a table or tables in this case, right? Because what you would end up probably having to do is, since this active user concept would be something that you would probably want to look at daily actives, monthly actives, maybe yearly actives, you're not going to be able to do that in one table nicely, so you're probably going to end up with multiple. And now imagine this, you have like tens of hundreds of questions. You're going to have with hundreds of tables, hundreds of views. You're going to have a decision tree of like telling your analyst, say, if you want to do this analysis on this grain, go use this table, right? It kind of becomes like a journey. And then you could put it on a dashboard, right? And then say, hey, you know what? Your abstraction is the dashboard. Don't look at the tables. And then that actually works great because you can embed that logic in widgets. You can embed that logic in semantic layers of the BI tool, right? And that works great as long as you don't want to move outside of that BI tool or you don't want to query that data elsewhere. And now, more recently, right, what's happening is we see some of this logic being applied in the LLM layer, right? So folks come in and then put, hey, here's the definition of my revenue as a prompt or a function, right? So call this function to get, calculate this when someone asks about it or use this formula. But then what ends up happening is you're still prone to hallucinations a bit, right? Maybe 95% of the time it's going to work great, but that 5% is going to be your trouble. And then again, there's the problem of the one before, right? Which is, how do I access it from anywhere else? Right? It's not SQL accessible. It's not accessible from these like other tools or like my ETL pipelines or my ML pipelines. So what we're saying is there's a better way, right? What if you could centralize all of this information, right? What if you could define your organization as key metrics, key data models centrally as an asset that you're managing and governing natively in Unity Catalog, which we're calling metric views. On top of that, right, what if you could also come in and govern it, certify it, and make it trusted? So when someone comes and searches for revenue, there might be like 100 columns on revenue in your database, but they will find this certified asset that's governed and metric, and published across the company that they can trust. And finally, right, the final pieces of it is how do you query it, how do you make use of it? And that's where all these integrations come in, right? Starting with our Databricks ecosystem first, and then expanding into the external tooling, right? What we want to make sure is you can access Unity Catalog metrics from any tool and any client. We're starting from AIBI dashboards, AIBI Genie, and a SQL API, right? So today already, this is already integrated. If you go to your workspaces, you can kind of start playing with metric views and dashboards, Genie, SQL, and get use of it. What's going to happen next is we're building a partner ecosystem here, right? Because we cannot stand alone in our own little corner of the world. You have all of your tools that you want to work with, and we want to work with those too. And as a starting point, right, all of the partners you're seeing here is our official launch partners committed to kind of building an integration in the next quarter or two to make sure that you can connect and make use of whatever assets you have in the Unity Catalog metrics, whether that's metadata about your metrics or being able to query them and leverage them from all these partner tooling. And this is a mix of, as you can see, BI tooling, catalog tooling, and then the data quality tooling like Anomalous. So it's a mix, and that's our approach. We're going to make sure that we cover all the bases as we kind of go along. And if you're not seeing your tool here, ping us, ping them also. And then if you need timelines, just let's chat back afterwards, and then I can share what the latest information I have on that. Just to go up now, switch gears a bit and kind of talk about the work, the workflow is everything starts with you kind of going in and then starting to define a data model, right? You first of all define what's my fact table, what's my dimension tables, data model, and then you come in and tell us, say, what are my measures and dimensions? Once you have this base, right? Once you have your data model and then the initial kind of metadata on top of it, the rest is actually pretty familiar already, right? You get all the benefits that you get with UC today, right? You can search these things. You get usage insights. You get lineage, downstream, upstream, both data lineage and asset lineage. So you can see like what the metric is being selected from, and then you can see where it's being used in a dashboard, in a notebook, in a pipeline, right? As I mentioned, you can certify these things, and certification is something that we're introducing across Unity Catalog, right? Imagine a data steward persona coming in and then saying, hey, in this domain, this metric view should be certified, right? This is the approved version for all of this. And now, when someone searches for that, that's going to get a search boost. That's going to show up in Lineage as, hey, this dashboard is using an approved and certified metric, right? So that is all kind of tied both on the Lineage side, usage side, and search side, assistant side. So it's kind of nice to be able to connect these things end to end since we own both the catalog layer and then all these consumption layers. And then finally, right, you might want to also say, hey, I don't want all of these things to be calculated on the fly. I want to be able to pre-compute some of the, slices of my metrics so that when I serve them, they're fast, because I don't need them to be calculated always live. And that's something we're also building into materializations, and this is a coming soon feature, right? You're going to be able to define built-in aggregations as part of your metric definitions. And then when a user comes in and queries the metric, we'll automatically figure out what's going to give them the best performance. And I'll talk more about this a bit later. Once you have it defined, and once you have it governed, right, you can kind of pick your poison in terms of where you want to query it, right? You can use natural language, right? This is all integrated in Genie, which I'm going to show you in a sec. Genie now knows how to talk to metrics. It understands how to consume the metrics. And then it can do analysis on top of the metrics. So you're not limited explicitly with what's ever defined in your metric views or semantic models, but you can go above them. Same with AI/BI dashboards, right? This is already fully integrated. So dashboards have understanding of all the additional metadata, labeling, formatting, being able to kind of generate the correct query at the right grain, and all of those things are built in already. But these no-code interfaces are not our only focus, because what we wanted to do was give you also a first-class SQL experience along with the no-code experience. So everything you can do with no-code, you can also do with code. So metric views are fully SQL built in. So if you want to use it from a SQL REST API, ODBC, JDBC, you've got a Python, Go, Node.js, whatever you can write SQL from, that is going to work. But one last thing to kind of call out in the overview section of the session is, but metric views is not the only thing that represents semantic layer or semantic metadata in Unity Catalog, right? The way we look at it, metrics is a portion of like what kind of constitutes a larger semantic model, but it's not the only thing. What we're going to do, and what you're going to see us do over the next months and years, is you're going to add to any asset you have in Unity Catalog, like your regular tables, your views, your materialized views, maybe your non-data assets like your AI models, files, dashboards, right? Things like synonyms, instructions, sample snippets, formatting information, tagging. We already have some of the ones above. So the larger point here is metrics gives you a way for you to manage your aggregation definitions, your KPI definitions really well. But the story doesn't end there, and then we're basically expanding Unity Catalog to host a lot of more reference metadata about whatever could be used in an LLM context, whatever could be used in a presentation context, right? And whatever else, could be useful for your business from a, including as a semantic perspective. So now kind of switching gears just a bit and talking about, the APIs and what we have now, what we're going to have in a sec is, let's go from left to right, right? Everything starts with you picking out which tables, which views, or foreign tables you want to kind of pick before you start modeling your, metric view. Then we have a SQL API where you can embed some YAML. I'll show you this, where you can kind of very quickly define, but everything is SQL expressions, right? This is not a new language that we're introducing. The expressions themselves are fully in SQL. And then using your UC tables and these definitions, you create your dimensions, measures, and then make that available as something that you can query. And on the left-hand side, as we were showing, right, you have all these ways to query them. Later on, right, we're going to be adding support for materializing these things ahead of time, right? So you'll be able to tell us, hey, please materialize my monthly actives, daily actives at this grain, materialize this other measure at these dimensions, like maybe like tens or hundreds of these things, even in a single large metric view. And what's going to happen is when the user comes and is querying, they write their query against the metric views. They're not aware of the materializations behind the scenes. The optimizer actually picks the best materialization based on size, based on cost estimations and all of these things. And then automatically, right, queries run against the correct materialization if one exists based on that to give you better performance. So imagine a world where you have a big metric view with many measures, with many dimensions, but maybe you have 20% of that you want to really always be fast, but 80% you want to make available, but you don't really care about how performant it is. Then you can potentially materialize a certain portion of it, and at query time, we will figure out whether we can serve from that cache or whether we need to go ahead and compute that on the fly from the raw live data. So, and that's how the kind of the materialization piece kind of plays in. Sorry for the typo, I just realized. So one question that comes up a lot is like, how do I think about a view versus a metric view, kind of on the more technical side, right? And just to give you an example, right? If you wanted to represent, a sum over a count distinct, or like a, we can also go to the count distinct monthly actives or daily actives example. You're going to end up with many views or many tables, trying to represent different groupings, different filterings, or different slices of that. But with the metric view, you can kind of encapsulate, 5 of these, 50 of these, or 100 of these like different views or tables as a single definition where you're kind of putting it as a multi-dimensional model where you have dimensions, measure definitions, and the user picks the group by at query time, right? So you don't have to prepend the group by right along your definition. It comes at query time, which gives you flexibility because then you end up managing a single model and not 50 different views or 50 different objects, which is pretty powerful as you kind of get used to that way of thinking about things. And just to kind of talk to you about what's happening behind the scenes when you submit a query, right? What's happening is we look at the query, and you're seeing the query on the lower hand side here, right? I have a select statement here. I'm selecting customer segment as my dimension. I'm selecting revenue per customer as my measure. And what you're seeing here is we've actually integrated this into the SQL syntax, as I was telling you. So just like you're kind of addressing any other table or any other view in Databricks, you can now query your metric views, right? In this case, this customer metrics is a metric view. And as you're seeing, I'm using the keyword measure so that I can actually tell the engine that it's a measure. And what's going to happen behind the scenes is we take this query, look at the metric definition, look at the data model, look at the joins we're going to need to do, and then compile this into something that is going to be equivalent in SQL. This is a simple example, actually, because this is like a one join with like a basic sum over account. In reality, what we're seeing our customers do is like 10-way joins with window functions with like CTEs, right? So what's happening is you're kind of abstracting like 4 or 5 lines of code, like 50 lines of code in 4 or 5 lines of code. And this is both powerful for like a human writing that SQL, but it's also powerful for an LLM writing that SQL because they don't have to figure out all the complexity. So you can kind of embed that and distribute that across your customers and your tooling in a much simpler fashion. What we're doing in terms of enabling you to be able to define metric views, as I said, is introducing just a packaging so that you can kind of define these things in a central, nice, easy-to-way fashion. It is right now in YAML, but all the expressions that you're putting are in SQL. So what you come in here is, in this file, you tell us, say, what's the source, meaning what's my data model, what are my joins, what are my dimensions, and what are my measures, where dimension and measure expressions are in SQL. And then that becomes the basis of like what we end up serving. And you can use the assistant to create this, by the way, which I'll show you in a sec as well. Right? You can go to the assistant and say, hey, help me create a metric view based on this table. Here's a few ideas I have about measures and dimensions I want you to include, and it's actually going to suggest you the full spec, and then you can just iterate on it quickly. And on the other side, as I kind of talked about this already, but on the other side of it, right, once you make it available, you can query it from SQL. One thing I haven't discussed is not only can you do these basic queries as I'm showing you here, like, hey, dimension, measure, filter, but you can also do complicated things. Like you can take this query, join it with another metric view, build it as like a CTE and use it somewhere else, or like put a window function on it. The main reason why we wanted to make sure this was nicely integrated in the SQL is, in reality, what you're going to probably end up doing is you're going to make much more powerful use of this thing by wrapping this in other workflows and kind of building on top of this thing. And what the metric views SQL API allows you to do is that build up. So you can compose metrics on metrics, but then you can build other pipelines, other ML applications, or other things on top of metrics, on top with just using regular SQL. All right. So with that, I want to switch over to demo and then show you all like an end-to-end flow of how you create a metric view, how that shows up in our Catalog Explorer, how you govern it, some other features, and quickly show you how you can actually query them. All right. Is our Zoom level good? More Zoom? Maybe one more Zoom. All right, cool. Okay, so for all of you who may not be familiar with this, but I hope you all are, this is our workspace, right? This is basically where you come to Databricks to get stuff done. This is your catalog, this is your SQL editor, this is your dashboards. What we're looking at right now is the Catalog Explorer, which is where you see all the Unity catalog metadata. And in this case, what I'm looking at is a metric view called order metrics. And as you can see, it is labeled as such as a metric view. It's living under a database called, sorry, I don't know why this is expanded, in my own personal database under the schema, right? So I'm organizing my metrics alongside my data objects, so I can put it in my catalog, I can put permissions on it. It's just like alongside my views and tables. And here I'm seeing the source of a metric view. In this case, it has a single line item fact table along with a single join, right? I have measures that are defined on top of this. And remember, measures are aggregation calculations, right? These are things where you're doing a sum, count, things like that. In this case, I have basic measures like total revenue or order count. Let me close this up. I have another measure called average order value, which is using two other measures, right? I'm getting a ratio of total revenue over something else. And then here I have a trailing 7-day revenue. This is a windowed measure. You get the idea. So this is basically a way for you to be able to define these things very quickly and get going. And dimensions are things where you want to be able to group by, filter by, and use it in your selects, right? So all of the measures that we showed up top in this example can be sliced by all these dimensions I have here. So I can group by my dates, I can filter by my dates, I can do that with the statuses. And as you're seeing, all of this is defined by as either basic column references, or if I wanted to do some pre-processing or want to do something with it, in this case, what I'm doing is, for example, I'm extracting the order status to be a bit more human readable. You could do this in an ETL pipeline, you could do this in a metric view, depends on how you're kind of building it. But the point here is these are powered by SQL expressions that you already know and work today in Databricks. If you have a UDF or I know you can use them here, right? So this is anything that would work in Databricks SQL would work here. And behind the scenes, when your query comes in, right, when the user query comes in, we kind of look at these definitions. We look at the join definitions, we look at the aggregations, and generate the optimal user query. One other thing to point out here is on the permissioning side, right, this just works like other tables. So I can come in here and apply, grant, the permission to select or manage or to edit to other principals in my organization. Once we support ABAC, that's also going to be something that we support within here. So as Unity Catalog rolls out ABAC support, that's also going to come here. For example, today, what already works on this side is, imagine my line item table had a row level permission or a column mask. And I, as my user, come in and querying the metric view on top of the line item table. What's going to happen is metric view is still going to respect all of those permissioning. So you can still, in Unity Catalog, build all those security layers on your base tables. And as you put metrics or ways to serve them on top of them, right, that is going to be available and queryable through the metric view. So you're not losing the security. And we're still applying all those primitives at that layer as well. The definition of this, as I showed you in the previous screenshot, looks like this, right? So I have my line item table. I have my join, in this case, which is another table that I'm looking up as a dimension table. I have all these dimensions that are coming from either my fact table or dimension tables. And then here, I have my measure definitions. And as you noticed, the only things you need are a name and an expression to get started, but you can put more metadata, right? We're introducing things like display names, formatting, presentation information, other than that, like things like synonyms, instructions. So there's a lot more that you can express, but the minimum you need is a name and an expression. And just to show you the syntax for different things, we talked about measure over measure. There's a way for you to be able to, for example, inline filters and measures. You can put windows, as I was saying. Here's one example for a trailing 7-day. Here's a cumulative window. But these are all things that we've abstracted so that you don't have to remember how to write window functions, and we'll figure that out for you behind the scenes. And one thing that I come up is, hey, John, do I have to write all of this stuff myself to get started? The answer is no. You can actually use the assistant to get bootstrapped. Let me show you that very quickly. So imagine we're in the, let me actually go switch here. So let's say I have this table called TBCH orders, right? And I want to create a metric view on it. So what I can do is I can click on the assistant button here. Let's start a new session. And then I can say, hey, help suggest a metric view on this table. Would be good if you can help come up with meaningful dimensions and measures. And what it's going to do is it's going to look at the metadata for the table you were looking at. It understands how to work with metric views. And it is going to, in this case, give me a metric view based on this table, the DDL for it actually, which has these dimensions to get me started, and then these two measures. And now what I can do is I can just click on this Open Metric View Editor button. And that is going to drop me in the create experience for a new one. I can now edit this. I can ask the assistant to do further edits if you wanted to kind of just use assistant and not write any of this stuff yourself. And then you can save it, and that is going to be available for you to get started. And this assistant experience I showed you could start from any table, any view, or it could actually also start from a Lakeview dataset. So if you're already in Lakeview, you have a data set, you can just go to the assistant and say, hey, I want to convert this to a metric view, help me. And then it's actually going to help you do that as well. So we're introducing hooks and more entry points for all of this. And that should hopefully be more powerful as we add it to more places. So that was basically the creation experience. Let me get out of here. Some things that I'm not going to show you just yet, but we're actually actively working on is hey, how can I put a UI-based authoring experience on top of this as well? That is both AI and UI without you having to write any YAML. So we're also thinking about things like that to kind of make it a bit less technical for other users to be able to use these things. But Assistant is already a great step in our view to be able to support that. But as we add more UI and things like that, that will hopefully be even easier to use. All right, so this was defining it, and this was governing it. So now let's switch gears and talk about querying it. Given that I have built this metric view, right? Let's start with SQL because that's the core of it, and then I'm going to switch to showing you a dashboard, and then I'll show you the Genie. So in SQL, these things are already addressable as columns. So in this case, what I'm doing is I am selecting from my orders metrics. I am selecting 2 dimensions. I am selecting 2 measures. And then if I were to run this query, what happens is it's going to compile this behind the scenes as we were discussing, right? It's going to look at the joins, it's going to look at the different aggregations and expressions, and it's going to return the result to me. And then if I wanted to look at, what the query plan for this query looks like, I can go here. Oh, sorry, it returned it from the cache, so I won't be able to show you the query plan, but can I show you the previous one? Anyways, the story here is you will be able to see what operations it's doing and what type of a query it's running, whether it's doing joins, whether it's serving from the cache, whether it's doing aggregations. So all of that stuff is available for you to be able to look in case you wanted to debug something or you want to make something available. But this is not the only thing you can do, right? You can take this, for example, and do more stuff with it. For example, in our model, we had it at the month granularity. But what if I wanted to look at quarters, right? And in SQL, it's a very simple operation to roll it up. And as I said, because we built this into SQL, you can just take an existing date grain and then roll that up. So as long as you have a lower grain available in your data set, we will allow you to roll it up. Obviously, you won't be able to roll it down, but you can always go up, and you can do things with it. So this is just an example for showing you how you can do a top 5 query. But the larger point here is, again, this is something you can join with other things. You can make use with other things. This is not a single simplistic API. And we also have APIs for all the metadata in case you wanted to consume this from your portals, other applications, or other tools. So you can get information about what's a metric view, and you can get the full definition of a metric view, including the measures and dimensions also in that side. All right, so with that was the SQL experience. Now let's switch over to something that looks much cooler, which is the Genie side. So let's say I want to ask some questions to it and get started. Right? How do I do that? A quick way of doing that is using the new Ask Genie experience that is built into the Catalog Explorer. So what this did is it created an ad hoc Genie space with the metric view we were looking at attached to it. There's no other instructions, there's nothing else. This is just literally the metric view being attached to a Genie space. So as I ask questions, let's start with one of the suggested questions here, right? Show total revenue by order date. What's happening is Genie is looking at the metadata for the metric views. It's understanding what's happening behind the scenes. And then it's generating a query based on the metric view and using the right syntax and giving me a result. Now, if I wanted to answer a question which wasn't directly in the metric view, Genie can also do that, by the way. So if I wanted to do something like, what about month-over-month growth of total revenue? And I think our cluster is offline here, so it's starting up. Sorry, I will fix that in a second. Let me show you this query. What it's going to do is I do not have a month-to-month growth measure in my set, but Genie can still work on top of it. So what it's doing is it's taking my existing date, rolling up the month, and then doing a window on the total revenue over month to month so I can get the results. So the point here is you start with something and give Genie a starting point, and then it can kind of go above it. But it is also careful not to answer stuff that is not going to know. So what we're trying to do is build a balance where Genie will reject trying to answer questions on metrics that it shouldn't be, but still give you some flexibility so that you can kind of go beyond what's explicitly defined in the metric view. And then you get the idea about like how this could kind of scale. So let's switch gears a bit. Let me show you the dashboarding side of it. Oh, and one point is, obviously, you can add this to any existing Genie space as well. You don't have to use this button. You can use it for your existing Genie spaces as well. On the dashboarding side, this is also fully integrated, right? So what you're looking at is our AIBI dashboarding experience in the data tab, right? What I have here is the order metrics being just added as a data set. And once I add it, Lakeview, the dashboard is aware of like how many fields it has and the measures it has. If I wanted to, right, let's say I'm an analyst, I do not have the permissions to edit this metric view, but I want to add some quick ad hoc measures or edit the ad hoc dimensions right here. How do I do that? I can do that by clicking this custom calculations button, entering my expressions either as a measure or as a dimension. And what's that going to do is it's going to give me the ability to create new measures and dimensions without having access on the main one. So I can experiment, I can expand on it, even if I do not have the core permissions to be able to model in the Unity catalog. Once you add something, once you add a metric view as a data set here, when you switch over to the canvas, now it becomes something that you can select from. And then now all of these widgets and all these controls have understanding of the metadata that sits behind it. For example, as I select the x-axis, right, the order date, it knows that it's time, it knows the granularity, it knows that it is a dimension. If I do the same with the revenue, right, it knows that it's a measure, it knows the numeric value. We're adding the ability to add the formatting, so it's going to know that it's dollar of currency format with a certain precision, and all of those things are piped, right? So you define them once, you know, in UC, and when you're querying it Genie, when you're querying it here, right, you get the correct dollar with the right precision, or you get the right labels that you've put. So if you want to change a label, you don't have to change it across 5 places. You can just change it in the Unity catalog side, and that is going to automatically apply to wherever you need it to apply. And of course, by the way, if you want to overwrite something locally, right, if I want to come in here and say, no, this is not dollars, this is euros, or hey, this is this label, or this is this definition, you can also do that. And then if you overwrite something, and then you'll go ahead and change something in centrally, then we will not go ahead and update and nuke that. So you also have the flexibility to kind of pick where you want to use what. And that we believe is kind of what makes it a bit powerful. I believe that was all I had for you all today in terms of the demo side, but we have 8 more minutes. So any questions, anything you want me to focus on in terms of a drill down, happy to take that.